So we have Magnus Carlsen versus Wesley So. We open e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, the Italian game, now bishop c5. Black goes for one of the old main lines, a symmetrical development, and he aims for a solid yet slightly passive position. We castle, knight f6, and now d3. White's plan here is very simple. He wants to go c3, h3, cover all the key squares in the centre. He might develop with knight d2, rook e1, and then look to expand on the queen side. Meanwhile, black will do much the same thing. He'll go for simple development with d6, perhaps bishop b6. He'll try and slow white down the queen side with a6. Then he might put his knight back on e7 and play for d5. So it's a slow positional game. Black castles, c3, d6, h3. One key point is we don't want to play h3 before black's castle because he could get a pawn storm with h6, g5. Black goes h6 as well, rook e1, now a6. Black is looking to play b5, of course we play a4 to prevent that, and now black plays very, very cleverly with a5. So he's taken two moves to do this, and what's the idea here? Well, if he doesn't play a5, we'll play a5 ourselves, and then we'll have an unpleasant bind on the queen side. So the main line here is actually bishop a7, and then we can start to think about b4, a5, and then once we've got the queen side on lock, we can start to develop and eventually aim for b5. So black plays a5 to prevent that. He will probably go for a plan of knight e7, c6, and d5 if allowed. Knight bd2, bishop e6. This is another way black can play. Again, it's in keeping with the kind of old main lines of maybe 100 years ago. Black looks to exchange off this strong bishop, get a slightly worse endgame, and then hold it to a draw. Famous last words against Magnus Carlsen. We go bishop b5. I really like this move. It's quite smart. I mean, we decline the exchange. Of course, you could exchange, give black double pawns, but then he can probably play for d5, and he's all right. We go bishop b5 instead, trying to take out this knight, and then black's control of the d4 square will be weakened, so we'll go d4 next. So black goes knight a7, and we go d4. Because we have the initiative, it's actually worth giving up the double bishops here. Knight takes b5, d takes c5, and now this clever exchange forces black to lose a tempo with knight a7. Very nice. White here has a few options. He could exchange immediately, but it's better to actually play b3, and then if black was to take this pawn, we'd have the e5 pawn. So black has to leave this setup hanging for another move. Black goes rook e8, simple development. He might be thinking about going either d5, or he'll bring the queen out of the way, bring the rook to the d file. Meanwhile, white will probably put the queen on c2, support this pawn, maybe might put the bishop on a3, for example. C takes d6, queen takes d6, and now bishop a3, very nice. Gain time on the queen and potentially gearing up for an attack on this isolated pawn later on. c5, and now knight c4. This is one of the key moves of the game. Now, why does white play this? I mean, bishop takes c4 forces doubled isolated pawns on white. Black will end up with this very nice open file because he'll be controlling the d file. Black will have the superior pawn structure, but Magnus knows that after knight c6, this c3 pawn is actually very effective because it's covering both of the squares that knight can come to, and it gives us two open files and a backwards b pawn to play against. There's actually no easy way for black to target these pawns as well because his light square bishop will be off the board. So there's a lot of 4D chess going into that move. Queen takes d1, rook a takes d1, and now, of course, you have to take the gauntlet with bishop takes, b takes, and now b6. Now, the stage is set for a very slow positional grind. White has a few manoeuvres in mind here. The first is to improve the position of this bishop. He can play bishop c1 and e3 because the h pawn covers g4 square. The bishop's much better on e3. It potentially supports f4 later on, and if white was to ever win this b6 pawn, the c5 pawn would become weak. Meanwhile, black will look to improve the position of his knights. He might play knight to c6, bring the other knight to f4 via h5. It's important to note here that the position is still equal, but I would take white here. Knight to h4. This is another way white can play. He brings his knight to f5. Generally in the Italian you have this race with both knights trying to get to the f5 and f4 squares respectively because it gives you quite a nice advantage. Rook a8 and now f3. Of course, after rook takes, black is threatening to capture on e4, so white plays f3 to safeguard that. And then the knight can come to f5, potentially back to e3 onto d5. Something like that might be possible. g6, of course, preventing this, prophylactic play, and now white goes g3. I like this move, very patient. saying, you know, I've got time to bring my knight round to e3, I can put my king on f2, and then I'll slowly outplay you in the endgame. Black goes knight to h5. Potentially I might have said, okay, why would I play knight h5 if white wants to play king f2 anyway? Perhaps better to improve the position of my worst placed piece, this knight. It can probably sit on c8 and just guard this pawn, would be very nice. So knight h5, king f2. Black goes for a slightly more active play with knight c6, but again, this knight has no squares. Can't go there, can't go there. If it goes back to e7, can't go to either of those squares either. So white has time to, you know, leisurely bring his bishop to the e3 square. Bishop c1, king g7, bishop e3. Rook takes, what else can you do really? And now rook d8. If black can get rid of all the rooks, then this b6 pawn is no longer a weakness because white won't have a rook to attack it with. The more pieces you exchange off, the closer you are to a draw as well. So rook b1, of course, decline that trade. Rook b8. Now knight g2. Knight back to f6 because this knight served its purpose. White might be gearing up for f4 later on. He might have to move his bishop and get his king to e3 in order to do that. Also, the knight, it will be coming to d3 and putting pressure on these pawns. Actually, if this knight ever moves, white will have the threat of c5. So black's rook is fixed protecting this pawn. Black's knight is fixed protecting the rook. It's only the knight and king that can actually move. King e2, knight e8, and now bishop f2. It's really instructive to see how Magnus converts this. Knight d6, and now knight e3, just in time to defend this c4 pawn. White might now bring his king to d3 and his knight to d5, put more pressure on this pawn and force black's knight into a passive square. Knight e7. Of course, we don't want to allow knight d5. Now, of course, white does it anyway because black's forced to take, and we get to undouble our pawns. So now you can see white's doing a lot better, and it's plus 1.9. We've reached the margin where this endgame is actually winning. Rook b7, king d3, f5. Now c4, of course, you don't want to allow black to play c4 because that would be annoying and it would lock the king out of the position. So we play it ourselves. We safeguard this pawn structure. F takes, and now rook f7. I like this play from black, trying to gain some activity. Right now, white's in an awkward position. The king's tied down here. Obviously, the rook's threatening the f2 bishop and come into f3 and put pressure on these pawns. But white is not impressed by this. Rook takes b6, threatening the knight. Rook takes, rook f3 check, king e2, rook c3. Now, black has obviously seen that he is threatening two pawns and white can not really defend either of them. So he just goes rook e6, stay on the offensive. That's my advice. Rook takes, now rook takes a4. White goes rook e7 check, and his two connected passed pawns should win him the game, because after king f6, d6, black resigns the game. If he tries to go for, say, rook d4, we'll just play e5 check, safeguard this very strong structure, the king's forced away, and then we'll just be playing d7, potentially e6, and then just shuffling all the pawns up the board. And black's two pawns are far too slow. So very nice positional... Sorry, it's my cat. Very nice positional display from Magnus. It's honestly amazing to see how he converted this. I hope you learned something, and I'll see you in the next one.